Donald Trump apparently wanted to make a point about two very different Americas. He posted a carefully chosen photograph of himself and Melania Trump dressed formally beside a photograph of Abdul El-Sayed and his wife, Sarah, sitting together in what appeared to be a restaurant booth. Sarah, a psychiatrist, was wearing a hijab. Trump's caption was simple: two very different Americas. And for once, Abdul El-Sayed agreed. That is where the joke gets good, because Trump apparently intended the image as a contrast. Instead, El-Sayed looked at it and essentially said, "Yes, exactly. You just made my argument for me." It is difficult to imagine a more efficient political backfire. Trump wanted Americans to look at two photographs and see difference. El-Sayed looked at the same two photographs and saw two competing visions of what America could be. One America is polished, formal, carefully staged, and wrapped in the imagery of presidential power. The other is two people sitting together over pancakes, apparently enjoying each other's company and imagining what kind of country they want their children to inherit. And El-Sayed's response was devastating precisely because he did not reject Trump's premise. He accepted it. Yes, he said, in effect, there are two different Americas. Then he changed the question. Instead of asking which photograph looks more presidential, he asked what kind of life ordinary Americans can actually afford. Can you afford your gas? Can you afford your groceries? When you look your children in the eye, do you believe they will have a better future than you did? Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about tuxedos, photographs, or religious clothing. It is about the price of living in America. That is a much harder question for a political image to answer. A photograph can make a president look powerful. It cannot lower the grocery bill. A formal portrait can communicate status. It cannot pay the rent. A carefully staged image can create the impression of prosperity. It cannot tell a parent whether their children will have affordable health care. That is the weakness of political symbolism when it runs into daily life. Trump's post was apparently designed to communicate difference. El-Sayed turned that difference into an economic argument. He said that his own vision was about building an America where he and Sarah could raise their daughters, aimed and sit in, believing that they have every opportunity to build a better future. That is a completely different kind of political image. It is not about who is standing next to whom. It is about who gets to stand beside their children 20 years from now and honestly tell them that the country gave them a fair chance. That is why the photograph of El-Sayed and his wife matters in the context of his response. Trump apparently saw a woman wearing a hijab and a couple sitting casually together. El-Sayed saw his family. He saw a wife he loves. He saw daughters growing up in America. He saw a future he wants to protect. And he turned the photograph back toward the person who posted it. That is a clever political move because it refuses to accept the premise that American identity is defined by looking a certain way. The implication is clear. America is not one photograph. America is millions of families who look different, worship differently, speak different languages, eat different food, and still want many of the same things: a safe home, good schools, health care, a decent job, clean air, clean water, a future for their children. That is the America El-Sayed described. And there is something almost comical about the fact that Trump's attempt to create a cultural contrast ended up giving El-Sayed an opportunity to talk about inequality, because once you move beyond the symbolism, inequality is exactly where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. El-Sayed argued that Americans have been too willing to accept enormous differences between people living only minutes apart. That is a powerful image. Two children can live 15 minutes from one another and experience completely different Americas. One might attend a well-funded school. The other might attend a school struggling to provide basic resources. One family may have reliable access to health care. Another may delay treatment because the bill could destroy the household budget. One child may grow up surrounded by opportunity. Another may grow up learning that opportunity depends heavily on the zip code printed on the address. That is a much more complicated version of two Americas, and it has nothing to do with whether someone is wearing a tuxedo or a hijab. The political genius of El-Sayed's answer is that he takes Trump's visual language and replaces it with human language. Trump says, look at these two photographs. El-Sayed says, look at your children. Trump says, look how different these people are. El-Sayed says, ask whether your family has a better future. Trump presents identity. El-Sayed presents outcomes. And outcomes are much harder to Photoshop. The most memorable part of the response may have been El-Sayed's final personal jab. He said that he and Sarah actually like each other before adding that he did not know about the president and first lady, but had heard that their relationship was somewhat rocky. That is the kind of line that makes political television hosts very happy, because it takes Trump's own comparison and flips it back on him. The president wanted to imply that these two couples represented fundamentally different Americas. El-Sayed essentially answered, yes, one of those couples actually likes each other. It is funny because it is personal, but it also illustrates a larger point about political presentation. Power can be staged. Affection is harder to stage convincingly. A formal photograph can communicate prestige. A casual photograph can communicate intimacy. And sometimes the second one is more politically powerful than the first. El-Sayed did not need to attack his wife. He did not need to attack Melania. He did not even need to spend much time discussing the photograph itself. He used the image as a doorway into a much larger argument about what kind of country Americans want. That argument is particularly important because El-Sayed's response is built around his daughters. Politics often becomes abstract. GDP, inflation, tariffs, deficits, interest rates, trade, immigration, regulation. All of these subjects matter. But parents do not experience government as an economic spreadsheet. They experience it when they buy groceries. They experience it when they receive a medical bill. They experience it when they wonder whether their children will be able to afford a home. They experience it when pollution affects the air their children breathe. They experience it when a good job disappears. That is why El-Sayed repeatedly brought the conversation back to family. He said he and Sarah want their daughters to believe they are every bit as capable of building a better future as anyone else. That is a fundamentally American aspiration. And it creates an awkward problem for anyone trying to define American identity through appearance, because the family sitting in a restaurant booth can want the same American dream as the family standing beneath chandeliers. The difference is not necessarily patriotism. It may be privilege, it may be opportunity, it may be economic security. And that is where the phrase two very different Americas becomes much more interesting than Trump probably intended. There really are two Americas. There is an America where presidential families stand in formal rooms surrounded by wealth and power. And there is an America where parents sit at kitchen tables calculating whether groceries, rent, insurance, and childcare can all fit into the same paycheck. There is an America where political arguments are about symbols. And there is an America where people are asking whether they can afford to live. There is an America where a hijab becomes a political image. And there is an America where the woman wearing that hijab is simply a wife sitting next to her husband, eating pancakes and planning a future for their children. That second America is the one El-Sayed wanted people to see. Not as a threat, not as a curiosity, not as an exotic photograph for somebody else's political message. As Americans. And that may be the ultimate weakness in Trump's original post. He tried to define the difference. El-Sayed refused to let him. Instead, he asked Americans to decide what difference actually matters. Does it matter what your family looks like? Or does it matter whether your children can build a better life? Does it matter whether your wife wears a hijab? Or does it matter whether she can breathe clean air and drink clean water? Does it matter whether a family photographs well in formal clothes? Or does it matter whether that family can afford groceries, health care, housing, and a decent job? Trump's photograph was meant to say, look at the difference. El-Sayed's response was essentially, look at what you are missing. And that is why the post may have backfired so spectacularly, because the two photographs really do represent different visions of America. The question is not whether those differences exist. The question is which America people want their children to inherit. And according to El-Sayed, he already knows the answer. He wants his daughters to grow up in an America where they have the same chance as anyone else, where families can live together without fear, where people can lock arms instead of turning differences into weapons, and where clean air, clean water, health care, good jobs, and opportunity are not luxuries reserved for the fortunate. Trump posted 2 photographs. El-Sayed turned them into a choice. And suddenly, the most important thing in either picture was not the clothing, the White House, the hijab, or the podium. It was the future.